Venri Chapter 13. Timeline. Stop the collectors. Use Omega-4 relay. Shepard. She had been walking the spaces that were now empty on the Normandy since finding out. All of her people were gone. Everybody was gone except for Joker, unless they had been in that shuttle. Everyone was gone. She knew all of their names. She'd gotten to know everyone on her ship as much as they would let her know. She'd seen pictures of homes, kids, loved ones, parents. She'd heard about favorite meals and hobbies and quirks. Bethany didn't like blastovids. Asir has a son at home with his wife on Earth. His son's name was Muhammad, and he was just now missing his 2 front teeth. The idea of having to write letters to everyone loved, everyone left behind, drove her into the empty spaces of the ship that were always silent. The shuttle bay. Nobody was here. She rarely came down here unless it was in preparation for a mission. Consider this preparation for the next mission. Would it have gone differently had she been here? She didn't know. It was nice to think heroic ideas of how she would have saved everyone, but more realistically, she didn't know. Too many variables to calculate. She also had a deep need to save everyone, and that made the idea of being a savior unreliable. Wishful thinking. Worst case, she'd have been caught in her sleep, unaware, or she'd have taken a stand that got more people killed, resulting in her being dead also. Right now, from Joker and Edie's accounts, it was possible that they were still alive. Taken, not killed. She was still alive, and she was very angry. But worst case was the best to consider because it tamped down all those ideas people foisted on her, that she was stronger than she was, that fate somehow favored her. She'd seen no evidence of either of those things. She'd been worried about Legion, and it was the IFF that was the problem. If the elusive man led them this way, and the IFF and the relay were traps, and he was indoctrinated, maybe he'd brought her back to be turned into a thing, like Harbinger after a bit of field testing. Not likely, but a possibility. Fuck it. It's not like she was going to stop now. She was going. She was going, and she was going to get her people back. Trap or not, she was going in. Reality beckoned. The shuttle bay doors were segmented metal, sheets over joints. Sturdy enough to keep the emptiness of space out. Sturdy enough for her. She started to punch at the metal joints, not hard enough to break bones, but hard enough to feel that intent, feel the need to hit something very hard, feel the skin break, feel the blood. Not to lose her temper entirely, not to blast a hole through these doors like she knew she could. Like she shouldn't. Just enough to siphon out a trickle of that unplumbed anger, gauge the depth of it. Imagine those 2 front teeth as she considered the path in front of her. Just for a little while. Just her and her intent against the unyielding. The world narrowed to the pounding of her own heart, the sound of her harsh breathing, and splashes of red dripping down the metal. She heard Garrus say, "What the fuck did that door ever do to you?" She wasn't done punching, and she didn't want to stop. She assumed he'd interrupted her verbally and loudly, and hadn't touched her because that would have been a bad idea. She would have hit him She knew it. He understood bad tempers. She loved that he was so smart. She loved that man so very much. Admiration spilled through her system like cream into coffee, splashing up and lightning in billows. In this state, she was like a predator pulled from her kill, lightened and loving or not. She turned, wiped the sweat from her face with her hand, and realized she was spreading the sting of blood there instead. It was that kind of day. She left it and said, "It was just in my way. I'm not done expressing how irritated I am with it, so if you'll just leave me alone, I can get it out of my system, how much this door bothers me. You're scaring the crap out of the kids, you know. They had to come get me. I'm not saying who, but nobody else was going to walk in on you." Good. That's the way it should probably be. Come on, Garrus, this can't be too difficult to figure out. I'm very, very angry, and when I see red, I like to see red. It's better if it's my red, because then nobody else gets hurt, and I don't have to feel bad. She held up her hands in postured fists. It's easily fixed with Metagel. Garrus paused for a moment, looked at her hands, and then the blood spattered on the door and said, "I occasionally like to see blue." "Then go punch your own fucking door. This one's mine." "If you're not careful, people will think you're not rational." It wasn't unkind. He was worried about her. People can go fuck off. I'll be fine when it's time for me to be fine. Right now, I'm taking the time to not be fine. This is how I do it. This isn't some sort of crap about how emotion is always a drawback, is it? I got enough of that from most of my instructors, and they were full of shit. Emotion is just fine. Sometimes I've got a lot of it, and I need to process. Some things I process by hitting other things. He shrugged. Okay, let's process together. She didn't want to hurt him. She told him, "Remember you said you wouldn't spar with me because I'd kick the crap out of you while you were pulling punches? I'd go with that instinct. The door doesn't break. That's why it's an excellent target, and you aren't." He shrugged again. "You also said I could break you in half. If you're right and you're not out of control, I'm perfectly safe. If you're wrong, I get a broken something and Dr. Shakwas fixes it. Educational, either way." This isn't really about safety. Don't you think we should be focused on an actual problem? You're not angry at me. I'm not angry at you. Let's just not be angry at each other. An actual problem like a door? She rolled her neck. All right. He was stressed too. This is how she did it. This is how he did it. He walked forward, and his stance and body language had transformed. He had a particular way of moving his head that even without a change of expression, it could move from neutral to menacing just because of the way his face was built. He truly was scary. No doubt. She could appreciate that in her current state of mind. Something about the way he moved meant she wasn't taking her eyes off of him. She waited for it, then held out a hand and gestured for him to continue. He indulged her. "Oh, come on. You haven't wondered?" "I have." she thought. All right, if you say so. She smiled. Not a nice smile. I might have. I told you I had instincts. Then let's just give it a try. You see red, I see blue. We'll see what happens. It was a shame she couldn't actually lick his voice. He was thoroughly, entirely distracting. Maybe being distracted from punching a door wasn't such a bad thing. Okay, let's play. She wondered what the rules were. She told him, You don't have your rifle. I could kill you from here. All right, then. Handicap. You don't use biotics. I don't use my rifle. So I get to go hand-to-hand with the Turian who was tied with the highest-ranking hand-to-hand specialist on his ship? Why the hell do you want to pick on me? I was just standing here. Bleeding. You were standing there bleeding. So if you want to hit something, let's hit something. Garrus, you're huge. I'm just a lowly human. He stepped forward, tossing his gauntlets to the side so his hands were bare. I'm not hearing no. He'd heard her say no at least twice. He didn't want to hear it. All right, give him what he wants. Even he isn't immune to wanting to take a shot at Commander Shepard. Maybe that wasn't fair, and it wasn't about Shepard. It was just about her. She'd tried to pull him out of his own anger-death spiral. This wasn't the same, but it was close enough to sympathize. He sought her out the way she sought him out. She could tell him no, right now, a direct no. So don't feel sorry for yourself, Shepard. You have all the power you need. If you're sure this is about command, say no. Say no, or shut up about his motives. Okay, then. So he's right, and it would be educational. And you wouldn't be alone. She waited until he started to move, keeping pace, making sure to be out of his way when he got wherever he was going. If he was going to fight, if he was going to insist, then... All right. She asked him. Any more rules? Or do you just want to break my neck and get it over with? He gestured at her hands. Same as yours. No broken bones, but blood is okay. No more than what you've already got going from one particular wound. I won't use claws. Or teeth. You're taking all the fun out of it already. He didn't respond, and she knew he wouldn't give up on this. She said, All right, Shakarian. That works for me. Just remember, I'm not as flexible as you think I am. I'll keep it in mind. If I bend you the wrong way, you'll let me know? I'll try, but a snap or a scream might come first. When is this charade over so I can go back to my door? She knew he wouldn't let her go back to her door. He shrugged. He knew he wasn't letting her go back to her door, too. 3 out of 5 falls should be fine. All right, then. I'm ready when you are. He made a few faint jabs, and she observed his feet without directing her vision there. She wouldn't telegraph her moves by focusing, and he wasn't allowed to see what she was planning. She worked on establishing his reach, which was considerable. She kept backing away from that projected sphere, plenty of room, and he couldn't get her boxed in here with this much space if she kept her peripheral vision in good shape. She kept him in front of her, and enough room around her at any one time to change direction if needed. She tried to calculate his stride, his reach, and what happened when he leaned and bent, creating a huge zone of potential contact around him. She factored in what would happen if he kicked, making it an even larger zone as far as reach went. Great. This was really gonna suck. She set her jaw and concentrated on staying out of his reach, moving from the calculation of that zone to the specifics. Which hand did he favor? The right. What was his style like? His style was terrifying, that's what it was like. She hadn't seen him kick yet, but he might. She hadn't seen him do all that much hand-to-hand, and when he had, she'd invariably been in trouble herself, so she hadn't gotten a chance to study him. As far as that went, he was pretty. He was beautiful. He was lethal. Thus, the sucking. She kept this up until he started to complain. This isn't a running away competition, Shepard. If you thought it was, I concede. You win. Just trying to tire you out? I cheat. Okay, commence sucking. She continued to back away until she felt he was in the right position, turned away from where she intended to go. She sped around that zone of contact, did a sprint that would have been so much better if she could boost it with biotics, but she didn't, and got close enough to him to brush her knuckles over the side of his neck. She said, 1, before he adjusted to her position and tackled her. He was really, really fast. There wasn't too much force in the fall, but enough to make sure she had to roll her shoulders and arms to absorb the blow so her breath wasn't knocked entirely out of her. Her head rebounded against the metal plating and a few stars swam through her vision, but it wasn't the end of the world. Yet. It wasn't the end of the world yet. Fuck. He stood, offered her a hand and pulled her to her feet, saying, You were a little premature. 1 fall. To me. Yeah. I get it. I can count. Just making sure. No head trauma? You wish. Hard head. Next round. For this whole thing to work, she was going to have to actually take him down at least twice. To give her time. Start now and hope like hell you can get to 2 in the next 4 rounds. He'd done most of his testing and he was going to get faster. She wasn't wrong. He wasn't overconfident, but although she'd warned him that she was essentially ready to cheat, he kept to a fairly formal inside-the-ring training stance. She was never going to win if she played that game, so she had to get him to overextend, get his center of gravity beyond the point that he could recover it easily. She was going to have to get him to lunge at her. That meant getting closer than she'd like and giving him more opportunities to hit her. She let him hit her and then moved out of range, blocking what she could, but taking some hits she couldn't block to the shoulders and chest. Fortunately, he didn't aim for her face. She gave up on blocking because the force was going to mean she lost the use of her upper arms soon. Pain wasn't the problem, though it wasn't fun, but hitting a crucial nerve and losing strength and going numb would be bad. When his body was in a position that looked like the best she was going to get, she faked a stagger back and got him to lunge at her enough so she could plant her feet, grab his hand and drop to her knees, pivot, and pull him forward and to the side with all her strength, which was barely enough. He didn't exactly go sprawling, but she helped him along his way by pushing down and forward on his back, saying, 2. Good thing his knees had plating. Looks like that hurt. She said, I'm not actually going to plant my foot on your ass, so let's just call that a fall. You are such a cheater. She made a smirk face. I told you that. Way to catch on. With a nod, he was up and ready for round 3, and she was short on ideas. He was a bit slower and more conservative. It was not going to be easy, and it might be impossible to pull him out of that stance. There was no way he was getting tired before she was exhausted. If she hadn't had all the Cerberus crap in her body, she would have just stood there wrenching her wrists, and he wouldn't have budged on that last fall. Round 3, and she was nearly winded and had trouble pacing her breathing. How long had she been beating on a door? Longer than she thought, based on the results to her stamina. He was doing less jabbing and had figured out he'd do better if he grabbed her, which was true, because he could throw her outright onto the floor. Grappling would lead to doom. There was no way to wear him down through hitting him, because it would just hurt her hands. For every hit she could land, he could get into. It wouldn't hurt his hands. She considered sliding in and taking his feet out, but that would likely backfire. Technically, she'd fall before he did, and she didn't want to risk wrenching his joints. Limping to the collectors would be bad. Watching him, she thought, maybe a hip throw. She watched for his pattern of reaching, and when it seemed most likely in her favor and his legs were in the right place, she let him grab her shoulders. When he pulled her in, she was nearly yanked off her feet, but she launched at an angle that allowed her to get behind his hip in a sidestep, his own arms providing the momentum. She got her hip onto the back of his upper thigh, her hand around his waist. She crouched down, lifted with her hips, lifted with her arm, and then wheeled him over, and he was off his feet. She tried to angle his fall so his fringe wasn't injured, but he still took it pretty hard on the outside shoulder. Her other hand was at his throat as a fist when he landed. The hard, or mostly hard part's done. One more. She smiled and extended her hand, and he took it, and she absolutely could not pull him up. Really? You won't even let me help you up? And he yanked her down with him and kissed her, one hand moving at the back of her head and one hand squeezing at her ass. The kiss made her dizzy. She was already breathing hard. It would be lovely if this was over. She dedicated herself to the kiss, happily, hoping that 2 out of 3 was good enough. But then he smacked her ass, picked her up with him, put her on her feet, and said, "Round 4." She tilted a little until she got her balance back, and said, "I think that's cheating." He looked down at her from a superior angle, saying, "Absolutely not. I know you have difficulty concentrating if I'm not around. I'm trying to help." Oh, so full of shit. Okay, round 4. This was, in fact, an excellent distraction. He knew it. She knew that emotion didn't hamper her from being pragmatic, and that she could shift gears quickly, but he should learn that if he was going to be around for as long as he wanted to be around, if they were lucky enough to have that much time. While she was busy thinking, he nodded to begin the round, then went from motionless to rushing her, and she couldn't get out of the way. She attempted an undignified scramble back, but it was too late for that. He had her by the waist with her arms trapped. He stopped their forward motion, and she had a sudden dropping vertigo. With exquisite balance and control, he repositioned her horizontally and put her on the ground with his hand cradling her head. She couldn't do anything with her legs. She would have just flailed and hit nothing, and his balance was too good to throw off that way. Her lungs were ready to give out entirely, and her laughter was harsh as he pressed his mouth to her forehead and said, 2. Garrus, I'm staying down. You win. Come on. I didn't want to do this in the first place. We'll assume you just did that again. Fuck. He got down on the floor beside her, his hand still under her head. You're really fine. I'm really fine. What's with the counting? Oh, well, most of my reflexes now are not for hurting people or getting them to fall, but for killing them. So 1 was for the side of your neck, and if I'd hit there hard enough, I would have killed you. 2 was for your back. If I'd punched down as you were going by, I would have taken out a nerve cluster and enough organs to paralyze you and kill you painfully. If not then at least when you were on the ground, unable to get back up. I marked the spots on you in blood. I don't spar with people in general, because I'm usually set to kill. I don't really like blunting those edges because I need them often, but you insisted. I was gonna go for your waist for the last one because you guys have some funky things going on there with your spine and a spot where I could sever it if I got the right angle, but seriously, I don't care anymore. I'm tired. I just want to stay here and remember how to breathe. You win. If I were gonna kill you, I'd go for the throat every time. If I had to. Really, I'd rather just shoot you from range. In your sleep, ideally. The rest is a pain in the ass. He smiled and stroked her hair off her forehead. You've trained with a Taurian? Yeah, several. You haven't trained with a human, but you don't need to. I needed to. I've wheedled training favors from a lot of species in order to stay alive and in good form. I haven't bothered with a Volus, but I'm assuming I could just pop them. I cheat. I'm not fair. I don't fight fair, and I won't fight fair. You figuring out how to not kill me is the sexiest thing I've ever seen, Bokan. Oh, come on. Don't reward failure. She turned her head to look at him, and his eyes had the warmth of blue suns. She swallowed hard. Vertigo. Again. Here she was getting her crew kidnapped, failing to get 3 throws or even try for a third. And he looked at her as though she were the most precious thing in creation. How she deserved him at all, she would never know. But she would take his word for it. If you're trying to exhibit failure, you're going about it entirely the wrong way. His eyes, his voice, her shaky state. She said, Turian foreplay is gonna kill me. She twisted her head sideways, closed her eyes, and played dead, tongue out. He laughed, stood up and drew her to her feet, then picked her up and threw her over his shoulder, bringing a gut-squishing oof to her lips. She decided to go with it, imagining he'd be more embarrassed if they ran into other people than she would be. He went to the elevator and brought her up to their quarters, set her down on her feet, and told her, Go take a shower. I'm gonna go get a shower of my own. Then I'll get some food for us, and I'll bring a bottle of something. She pulled his head down to hers and kissed him. He was the only solid thing she could feel. She wanted to hold on. She was tired. She was hungry, but she wasn't angry anymore. She was focused. She'd take out her anger soon. She'd get them back. They would get them back. She had him. She had a team. She was alive. and she could kiss him. She murmured, "Thank you," against his mouth, and then turned to go do the reasonable things he'd asked her to do. He didn't ask what the thank you was for, and if he had, she'd have said, "Everything." She peeled her clothes off to reveal lots and lots of bruises. Turian-shaped bruises on her shoulders, her arms, one new across her stomach. Oof. He'd landed so many strikes. That was a good man to have on your side. She considered that she might not live long enough to let these bruises heal. She was going to honor the bruise today and not cover them up. They might be with her for as long as she was alive, and she was oddly proud of them. Proof that despite her obvious fragility, she could take a hit. It was also oddly romantic, pulling her out of despair by beating the crap out of her. She was a very strange person. This was obvious. He understood her, and that was a miracle. She looked tired, small, battered, and pale. This weary, worn, and wary child was going to kick some ass tomorrow. She took a long shower, but no painkillers. If it was going to hurt, it was going to hurt. She left her hair wet, no makeup, threw on a pair of underwear and a long t-shirt. She would have liked her old, ripped-up shirt from N7 training, but that was a lifetime ago. Her belongings had been either disposed of or dispersed. She'd had bruises like this a lot in the past. At least now her life was her own, her command was her own. She had the basics, and she had love. Her love was getting dinner. She sat down to wait, then decided to lie down on the couch for a moment and rest her eyes. She woke to Garrus stroking her arm. She opened her eyes to see his face as he sat on the floor facing her. She still had to look up. She smiled at him and said, "Hey." "Hey. I brought wine. Best I could afford on a vigilante's salary." Dinner was on the table, and the bottle, too. She smiled. "Ooh, mashed potatoes. They're instant. He really can't fuck them up. Someday I'm gonna have my own kitchen." She gestured to a cabinet, and he got a shot glass and a bottle of whiskey out and put it next to the wine bottle. He poured out a shot for her and a glass for him. He handed her the shot glass, and she downed it. She clicked the empty shot glass against his wine glass and then put it down on the table upside down. He got the mashed potatoes and fed her a spoonful. "Oh, those are terrible. Too much salt. How is that possible?" She made a face. "Well, they look pretty awful and they smell worse, but this is the only thing you'll even consider eating, so unless..." She gestured to the cabinet again, and he rummaged for a little while and then brought out a box of cookies. She reached out, and he held the box back, opened it, and said, "Are you kidding me? These are even worse." She gestured, and he passed them over. She told him, "You have no respect for human things, you know. It hurts my feelings." She munched happily and figured cookies and whiskey could do worse for a last meal. "Because eventually I'm hoping you'll see things my way. See, if you were a Turian, I'd be complimenting your waist or your fringe, so you're, hair looks good, and your waist is very supportive. Sweet talker. I mean, Sundkan talker. You're really bad at this. We never really did the courtship thing, did we? We jumped straight to blood and bond. I'm not complaining, but I know less about you than I'd like. We haven't had much time for cultural exchange. She thought a moment and then said, if you were human, I'd be complimenting you on your shoulders or your wit, so I'm in luck there. Your, shoulders are blocking the light, and your wit is all there. He held up a finger and then mimicked getting an idea, went over to the speaker system and put on the most God's awful music she'd ever heard. He gestured victory, and she said, Oh, no, turn that off. Turn it off. Garrus, that's a crime. He fake fumbled, turning it off, and then said, Crap. That was human music. Doesn't it all sound like that? She stood and shooed him out of the way, then chose a playlist of classical and instrumental. She told him, This, love, this is what human music sounds like. Violins require 5 fingers. She looked at him in disapproval. How could cookies smell wrong? She marched back over to the cookies, ignoring that he pinched her ass on the way by. She poured herself another shot. He sat down next to her and traced an extended talon around the edge of one of the bruises on the side of her upper arm. So, you got everything you want, and here I am, you without a fringe or a proper waist, and I'm just gonna have to, what? Make do? She tilted her head. You could try to go find another partner on the ship that suits your preferences, but you'll be disappointed when I kill you both. Make do it is. Good call. He tilted his head back. Do you get jealous? You've never given me a reason to be jealous. Not one. You don't look at other women. You don't touch other women unless they ask you to. I suppose at the Turian reception, that was the first and maybe only taste I had of it, but I didn't own it yet. Or, let me say, I didn't own you yet. If, big if. I've had lovers who shared other partners, and I haven't been jealous. But I do know that if you looked at another woman the way you looked at me, something would break. Something important. Something I need. Like my spine. Yes, I'd be jealous. But it would be quiet. A switch would flip somewhere, and I'd be closed off. I'd walk just as straight, even without a spine, and only I would know it was gone. Maybe you'd know. She nudged him. I walk funny around you. Do you get jealous? I didn't, until I met you. You've given me no reason, but I had been trying to figure out my reaction, if you had. If you favored someone else, it would only be temporary. Then I'd kill them, and I wouldn't need to be jealous anymore. She nudged him again. I would have been willing to let you go be happy with a better woman. He nudged her back. Considering there isn't one, that would be stupid, wouldn't it? Murder. It's the only way. Maybe it's a Turian thing. Seems like a human conscience is a one-way ticket to dumb. What did you dream of as a young Turian? Well, it's been a while. I wanted to make my family proud. I loved guns. I like the idea of catching the bad guy. So you've kept all the things you wanted. If your family isn't proud of you, you deserve better family. Only you combined 2 and 3, and now you shoot the bad guy. Unless you stop me. So let's hear it for being where we want to be. Wherever we started, I'm glad we're here. She reached for another cookie, and he reached for her wrist, held her arm up, with the underside patterned with large bruises. You have stripes. Is this from today? I did this? She held both arms up. You did that. You insisted on doing that. You didn't even flinch. Why the hell didn't you stop me? You wanted to know what it would be like. That's what it's like. I'm squishy. I bruise. I'm easily lacerated. You also happen to have a bad temper. I don't know if anybody's ever told you that. It was educational. You took painkillers? She looked at his face. No. Going natural this evening. You're also the best painkiller I know. Venri, I'm sorry. She held up a hand. Don't be. I'm afraid I don't want to tell you no. I'd rather be bruised and with you than unbruised without you. It was more fun to be hit by you than for me to hit a door. It refocused me. I would have been focused by tomorrow either way, but you got me there faster. And I can enjoy my evening. I have a bad temper, and you're an idiot. Maybe we do deserve each other. Are you finished eating? Why? Do I need my strength? You can have mine. Yes or no? Yes, I'm done. He held up a hand, rejecting her answer. You don't even know if you're hungry, do you? Why ask me questions if you know the answers? To gauge how clueless you are. So, that'd be a lot then, huh? She shrugged. She'd rather argue with him than eat. She'd rather argue with him than do most things. He grabbed her hand and pulled her up. I'm gonna have to be more specific, aren't I? On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do these bruises hurt? 4. Maybe. Fading. I heal fast. Plus, whiskey. And I'm your chosen painkiller? Please? He traced the line of her lip. You're like a toddler. Half the time you need a nap and you need to eat. How do you manage? She looked at his finger and nibbled on the end of it. I don't feel like a toddler. No, you don't. Any final words before you lose your mind? Let's not die tomorrow. If you die, you haven't seen bad temper yet. You'll be very sorry if I find you in the afterlife slacking. What should I say? You can make me say anything you want anyway, right? Tell me you love me. I love you, Garrus Shakarian. More than I thought I could love. He took off her clothes and looked at her skin, tracing the edges of bruises until her skin broke out in goosebumps. How could I make you say anything better than that? He focused on her skin. One day, we're going to be able to make things go right in a way we haven't been able to see. One day, Sisek, Sidonis, Cerberus, they'll be far behind. Someday, when we get somewhere civilized, because we are not going to die and you are not allowed to plan for it, You can show me what you like to eat. One day, I'll be able to see you rested, sated, and in no pain. That's what I want for us. That's what we're going to get. For now, Venri, tell me where it hurts. I've seen you at a 10, so now it's 4. She nodded. Warm trickles through her body from his voice and his hope and the whiskey. Hungry wasn't bad, she just felt hollow enough to be filled with light. He stepped around her and began to massage her shoulders, thick fingers digging into her muscles, and she started to groan. Her shoulders were tight, and it hurt. Not a good hurt at first, and she was maybe bumped up to a 5. Are you doing this because it's the only place I'm not bruised? You're gonna fix that? You're such a baby. Not even a toddler, a baby. She was gonna tease about being dead soon, but she didn't want to. She wanted to keep up that thin ice sense of hope, of survival, of being back here tomorrow night with more bruises and stories. With his hands on her, she could feel it. He lightened up a little on the fingers, and her shoulders were beginning to melt. Okay, I'll be brave. Down to a 4 from a 5. That couldn't possibly have gone from a 4 to a 5. You've had flamethrower burns. You've been dead. You have strong fingers. Well, that's true. And you like to hurt me. He moved his hands to her hips and pulled her back against him, kept one hand on her hip, moved one hand to her shoulder, tipping her head back. That's also true, but I'm the best painkiller, you know. She turned around and began taking his clothes off. The fabric was thin enough to rip, so she did. Satisfaction in rending it, more satisfaction from being able to touch him. She scratched along his shoulder ridge and rubbed her face against his chest, her hands trying to touch every place on him that she could reach. She closed her eyes and embraced the dizzy. Inside her head was dark and warm, and his hands raised more goosebumps on her skin where they passed. She wanted to whisper his name over and over. He had so many names for her, but she had no better word for him than just his name. When she'd met Archangel, he'd said, "It's just Garrus to you." Just Garrus to me. Moments after seeing her again, he let her know she was special to him. He'd known it was her. He'd had no doubts. She loved the way his name sounded, the way it felt in her mouth, the way it escaped from her lips. The closest thing to prayer she'd known. You're just Garrus to me. You're just everything to me. I want to live, and if and when I die, I want to argue with you in the afterlife, bad temper and all. Come be just Garrus to me, for me. Come make me be the best person I can be, because I want you to be proud of me. Thinking that, she stilled her hands and stepped back so she could look up at him, gathering his hands in hers. She had something to say, and she wouldn't do it with reverie robbing them both of reason, her most of all. She didn't care if they were monitored anymore. Too late for anybody to catch them or do anything about it. If it was a trap, it was yet to be sprung. If it wasn't a trap, they were needed. They were at the finish line, poised to cross over. She looked in his eyes and said, "Garrus, I want only one thing I can't get for myself that you haven't already given to me. If I am gone, do not throw your life away. I won't allow it. You are my second in command on this vessel, and everyone knows it. They will follow you. You don't need to face a trial for Batarian deaths. You had nothing to do with it. I didn't bring you with me for that reason. Take this ship to Palaven. Fight for the people remaining who still love you. I need your rage facing out, not in. Promise me. She might be naked, tiny, battered, and weary, but it was a command, and she expected him to follow it. Even if he didn't agree now, or agreed, but lied to her, he'd remember later. He'd know that's what she wanted. He wouldn't fail her. She knew it and vibrated with it. She watched his eyes swirl with pain and shock, in equal measure with love, and a particular familiar tension in his face when he took in what she'd said. The unyielding, protective, fierce part of him that wanted to simultaneously throttle her and lock her safe in a room that only he had the key to, leaped in his eyes, and his hands tightened in hers. Come on, Garrus. I'm not devaluing your pain. I'm valuing your life. She saw an expression on his face that might lead to, "Fuck you, Shepard." And she was ready to accept it for now if that's what he had to say. You're mine, like it or not. Yes, I am bitch enough to tell you what to do, even if I'm not here to tell you what to do anymore. You will remember. He resolved whatever struggle went on in his head. She saw clarity in his eyes. He didn't argue. Instead, he pulled his hands from hers and put them on either side of her throat, talons out, points on the skin of her neck and the back and side of her head. Will you come get me, Bukan? On that day. On the day I die with the thought of you as much a part of me as my heartbeat? Will you bring me with you wherever you go? Tears stung her eyes as she heard the Turian cadence to his words, his heart. She told him. I did it once. What makes you think I won't do it again? I'll kick your ass if necessary. You don't want to spend eternity looking bad, do you? And you would forgive me for allowing you to die? You expect me to forgive myself? You know how stubborn I am. Whatever it is, it won't be your fault. It will be my choice. I would never, will never want you to bear that weight. If you will come back for me, if I have the right to be at your back wherever you go by keeping faith. Yes. If you are gone, I will live my life in a way that would honor you. I'm yours, Garrus. I was yours then. I'm yours now. I will be yours later. You will always have the right to know in your heart that if I am not there with you, I want to be. He pulled her into his arms and rested his head on hers, his arms hard around her back. You are adored, Venri. Sometimes she was jealous of his expression, of his clear-through Turian loyalty and unambiguous voice. He'd earned the right to be trusted. She hadn't earned it, maybe, but she'd demanded it anyway, and he'd given it to her. Humbled and whole, she leaned against him, unwilling to break the silence he'd created, until he said, Would you do something for me? What can I do for you, Garrus? Sing me a song. A song? Really? What kind of song? I like the music playing, but there's no voice. What were you singing with Morden? Something about pirates? Pirates of Penzance. There is something from there I could sing. She turned the music off and sang to him, changing some of the pronouns. Oh, leave me not to pine alone and desolate. No fate seemed fair as mine, no happiness so great. And nature day by day has sung in accent clear this joyous roundelay. She loves thee, she is here. Fa la la la, fa la la la. She loves thee, she is here. Fa la la la, fa la. Oh, must I leave thee here in endless night to dream, where joy is dark and drear, and sorrow supreme, where nature day by day will sing in altered tone this weary roundelay. She loves thee, she is gone. Fa la la la, fa la la la. She loves thee, she is gone. Fa la la la, fa la. His hands moved over her as she sang, and his hands ended up one around her throat and one between her breasts. She said, "That's a bit distracting." He brought out his Omni-tool and set it to record, and said, "Do that again." "I sound like crap and I haven't warmed up." He squeezed around her waist for emphasis, but didn't need to ask again. She sang it again, and he recorded her voice, moving her back against his chest with his Omni-tool in front of her mouth. He wanted her voice. She wished she'd thought of it herself. If he were gone, she'd want to hear him. He didn't care if it wasn't her best, and he wouldn't care, because it was for him. And he already knew she wasn't perfect. She finished the song she'd originally sang, and then she sang from West Side Story. Make of our hands one hand, make of our hearts one heart, make of our vows us now. Make of our lives one life, day after day, one life. Now we begin, now we start, one hand, one heart. Even death won't part us now. She ended the recording on his Omnitool, and then held hers up to his mouth, where he said, I love you, Commander Shepard Moram Venri Chapter. I am for you, and always will be. She stopped the recording, and he used his hands to trace the path of tears down her face, and there were no more words tied together in sentences. His hands were careful, and hers were urgent. His pace won, because there was nothing she could do if he didn't want to cooperate. His body was closed. She was torn between prying at him until he gave in and giving up on physical intimacy and just lying next to him in bed, focusing on wherever his hands were on her. She wanted too much, needed too much, and she kissed him frantically. His hands were gentle on the sides of her face, along her waist, stroking back her hair. He lifted her and put her carefully down on the bed, face down, and if she tried to turn, he held her in place until she gave up. Her will against the unyielding came up in her mind again. She held still, the images of 2 front teeth and shuttle bay doors flashing through her mind. He continued with a massage of her shoulders and back, working his hands initially painfully through her muscles. She clenched her teeth together through the initial pain and made no sounds. His hands worked at her until she couldn't even try to tense them up again, despite her mindset. She would never be able to say or do enough of what she wanted before they were out of time. He'd said now or 100 years from now. Not enough time. So, just now. There's just now. The resistance of her mind slipped away. The resistance of her body was worked out through his hands. She couldn't tell any more when she was with him if she came to peace on her own or through his hands or through reverie. Everything seemed to curve toward acceptance of whatever it was she needed to accept. Did it matter, really? And wouldn't she find out if he were gone? She relaxed further, and his hands tested her. She imagined his hands leaving impressions. She felt like warm candle wax. Her grasping, reaching will faded from her, and all she wanted was what he wanted. Whatever that was, hurt, help, or hold. She unclenched her teeth and whispered his name. Not sure that he could hear it, just that she wanted to say it and hear it. The best use of her time. His hands changed from testing her muscles to exploring, tracing dips and curves, the lines of her thighs and the edges of her shoulder blades, along her spine. He raised her hips off the bed with both hands, supporting her with a hand splayed over her stomach as his other hand searched her body, finding his way inside. A finger at her clit and another pressed into her and the warm candle wax feeling spread through her whole body from her muscles and his hands. Her hands gripped the sheets on either side of her. He worked at her slowly, and his pace with massaging her muscles had her lying still, trusting, arching against his hand, feeling his talons open up enough to push sharp points into her stomach skin. Sweat rose on her skin, and he licked at her spine, tipping them both into a faster rhythm. She came with his teeth on her back. He lowered her to the bed, and then lifted her hips again until he slid into her, slowly and entirely. He leaned into her, covered her body with his. He worked his hands under hers, disentangling them from the sheets, until she gripped him instead. She pressed her back against his sternum blade, but her strength was failing her, and she was slipping away. He rolled to the side, taking her with him, keeping their hands together. His mouth pressed to the back of her neck, and he nuzzled there as she said his name and drifted into warm sleep. Timeline. Stop the collectors. Defeat the collectors. Shepard. She wasn't sure that she was hearing what she was hearing. Miranda wanted to lead a team into the base? Sometimes Shepard wondered if Miranda snuck into Shepard's and Garrus's quarters and put on a bit of her armor, like Legion had, and then pretended to give out orders. As much as Moore might have learned to appreciate Miranda for her ability to spare her the paperwork and stay out of her way, she was appalled at Miranda's complete inability to read a crowd, convince anybody to help her, or acknowledge that she hadn't gained the respect or loyalty of, well, anyone. Miranda was accustomed to command, and she had no tools when it came to people who did not respect people accustomed to command because they were accustomed to command themselves. Jacob had also volunteered helpfully to get himself killed when he wasn't qualified. Is this where they decided to assert their Cerberusicity and bump her out of command? No need to overreact, but she'd watch. She overrode Jacob's suicide and sent Legion through the shaft. He'd be able to tolerate hostile conditions, and he was the best tech expert available for the job. No insult to the non-Geth members of the team, but he had the home team advantage. He'd also had the least amount of team building of anyone, and although Moram found him endearing, that feeling did not magically extend to the other crew members. Let him show he could do something for the team, and if he failed, team building could continue by sending someone else through, and they could step over him and get it done instead of having to stand beside him and wonder if he was going to shoot them in the back. Please, Legion, don't disappoint the fuck out of me. Miranda was continuing. I'll lead the second fire team, Shepard. We'll meet you on the other side of the doors. Jack said, Not so fast, cheerleader. Nobody here wants to take orders from you. Garrus was shaking his head, agreeing with Jack's assessment. Moram almost smiled, but she could read the room. Even if she didn't know every person in this room as well as she did, it was clear. The second team needed Garrus. She really hated that she knew that instantly. It would be so much nicer to keep him with her. But Miranda was still arguing. This isn't a popularity contest. Lives are at stake. Shepard, you need someone who will command loyalty through experience. She was right about that. She just wasn't right in the least about it being her. Morim said, "Garrus, you're in charge of the second team." Garrus nodded. No idea what he was thinking other than that he agreed to it. Everyone was as ready as they were going to be. She told them, "I'm proud of every last member of this team for the sacrifice they're willing to make. I'm proud to have known you, to become a part of your lives, to have fought by your side. We've done all we can about the what and the why of this mission. You are the who, and I'm honored to be counted among you. We are a team, and some of our team members are not here. It is up to us to make sure that no more humans, Drell, Solarians, Turians, Krogan, or Asari, or even Batarians, Vorcha, and Volus, that nobody else gets turned into a science project. No offense, Morden." There were a few smiles, scattered laughter, Morden saying, "None taken." "All right. Let's go take care of the where and the when, and then meet back here and do some serious drinking. I'm buying." Everyone filed out, and once again it was just her and Garrus, alone in a conference room. Garrus stepped up to her and said, "I've got a bottle of something if you've got a bottle of something." He looked at her face. "It was the right call. I want to be with you, but I also want to get the job done so we can all get back safely. Let's just get it done, fast and clean. Let's go get our people and keep them safe." Garrus took a chain that was in his hand and put it around her neck. He had set his mandible shard into a locket, a geometric silver, blue, and ivory piece. It no longer looked like a mandible, but they both knew what it was. Inside the locket was engraved the word Venri, and when she opened it, his scent enveloped her. On one side was a scent crystal. He took one fingertip, brushed it against the crystal, and then against the pulse points in her neck. "It's not a nasal spray, but I asked Morden very nicely to take a sample, and he made this." He tucked it under her armor, pressed his crest to her forehead, and told her, "Take me with you."